Hi everyone, my name is Lily and I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind, and today I'm bringing you my PowerPoint review of Katabasis. I have never done a PowerPoint presentation party. I've never it's been a long time since I've done a PowerPoint period. And so now we're going to do one for this. I actually don't know how people do this. So I thought I was going to have screenshots of the slides and put them on the screen. And then I saw people who are doing it online and they just hold up their computer. So I guess we're holding up our computer. I can't read this because it's backwards for me. But anyway, it just says Katabasis. Before and after my descent into the underworld. I feel pretty chuffed with that title, not gonna lie. But anyway, I'm finally giving you my review of Katabasis, and I have a lot of things to say, so let's just get into it. I mean, look, this is how many things that I tapped when I was reading it. So, I have thoughts, major thoughts, and I think it's just worth it that I talk to you about them. First of all, this isn't in my PowerPoint, so you can see how well, how good I am at this. I want to just mention the fact that we can critique the things that we love. I feel like I see people who are either this has to be a favorite that I have no qualms with, or this is the worst thing ever. I think that there's room for discussion, about things. As people know, I don't know if I have to provide my qualifications about being an R. Kuang fan, but my humble brag, I guess, is that my blurb is in the US paperback editions of The Poppy War. And I own a lot of copies of Babel, and I own a lot of copies of Yellowface. So basically, I was a fan of the Poppy War before it came out, and I had an arc, and so I've done a lot of things with R.F. Kuang. Suffice it to say, R.F. Kuang is one of my favorite authors, but at the same time, I feel like R.F. Kuang has the artistic and authorial integrity to also realize that we can question parts about our favorite books. I guess that's just my PSA before I go into it. Obviously, that's not on a slide, so let me find the things. So first of all, we're talking about pre-Katabasis. So I know a huge theme of this was what you should do beforehand, how you should prepare. And that is what my first slide says. I can't read this. It's going to be so awful. Required reading and expectations. And then it says, what do I need to read? What could I expect from my most anticipated adult fiction book of 2025? So, in terms of required reading, I've talked a little bit about this on my TikTok. I think that you don't need to read The Inferno. Questionable take, maybe. I read The Inferno, and The Inferno, if you've seen my reviews online, it basically just felt, I need to put this down. I got a vaccine today and my arms are killing me. I have talked about this already on social media, but I don't think you need to read The Inferno. I did, and it's kind of just a name drop of things. I think if you want a TLDR, what you basically should know about The Inferno, it's basically just that Dante is going down into hell, and there are different courts, and they're organized kind of about what the person has done wrong, and also how they will be punished. So that's kind of the basic structure, and it's a ring of kind of lesser things to larger things to the bottom of hell, basically. That's kind of the base gist. Actually, my other maybe controversial take is that I actually think that reading Alice in Wonderland was the thing that fit the vibe the most. So Katabasis has kind of this topsy-turvy way to think about the world. In this idea, kind of hell sort of acclimates to what your hell would be. Kind of the whole idea of hell is other people. Hell acclimates to what you think it would be for you, or what you would think of as hell, I guess. It has kind of an academic mirror, I guess, of Cambridge in this one. And so that is kind of why I have this recommended reading of Alice in Wonderland. For me, it was a reread because I had read this ages ago, but it also has these characters that come into your life and you're what's your deal? I think it's just to me, it's kind of Alice's descent into Wonderland, in a sense, kind of mirroring this descent into hell, I guess, which sounds a little bit harsh. But it has kind of that similar vibe, I guess. So that would be the thing that I would recommend the most. Also, the main character's name is Alice. So I don't really feel like I'm reaching very far with this one. So that is what I wanted to talk to you about the required reading. And now I want to talk about my expectations. So as I've said, Katabasis was probably one of my most anticipated adult fiction reads of 2025. I love R.F. Kuang. And I think that it kind of goes into my next point, but I didn't have, it was weird because on one hand, hugely anticipated, high expectations. On the other hand, I didn't read an actual synopsis of Katabasis until probably the day I started this one. So in that sense, I didn't have a lot of expectations for the actual book and the actual plot and the characters. I had more expectations for the product that is Katabasis, like the hype for R.F. Kuang's next book. So I did want to chat about that in terms of expectations, just so everyone knows where I am before I started reading. And next we're going to chat about my something that I was thinking about, the first thing I was thinking about when I finished reading, which is basically the right book, right time, and my R.F. Kuang journey. So when I read The Poppy War, I read The Poppy War before it came out as an ARC, and I adored it, mostly because I had been searching so hard for representation in adult fantasy fiction forever. Like, I had read so many beautiful books. Like, I love Octavia Butler. I love N.K. Jemisin. I've read so many books like that. I love Jade City. But I really wanted to find more representation that I felt like mirrored a little bit more about me. And so when I first read The Poppy War, I glommed onto it. I grabbed onto it. I gravitated towards it. And I was like, this is so good. And it makes me feel so hopeful about the state of adult fantasy fiction at that time period. And to be fair, I don't think that The Poppy War is the first of its kind. As I mentioned, the N.K. Jemisin, N.K. Jemisin's The Fifth Season came out before The Poppy War. There are a lot of other really fantastic fantasy fiction greats that came out beforehand as well. I wouldn't say it pioneers it, but it's very much in a conversation of one of my greatest, fantasy fiction books of all time. And for me specifically as an Asian reader, I really, really loved being able to see that representation. And so for me, I was also at this time kind of reawakening, I guess, my Asian heritage. I don't want to get into this too much, but I had grown up in a predominantly white upbringing. I'm adopted. I'm a transracial adoptee. This was kind of one of my major starting points into reading more diverse fiction that would kind of talk to me more as someone who didn't really fit in growing up and in my family. And then when I read Babel, I really was struggling when I read Babel in my personal life into trying to figure out if I should go into academia. And I ultimately decided no. And Babel came to me as kind of the book right on the crux, the end of that decision, and really kind of reinforced a lot of things I'd been thinking about academia in general and as a whole, kind of about this elitism, this sort of removed distance it has, also the ways that it is tied into oppression, it's tied into power structures. Babel was to me one of the most perfect books to read at that time. And then Yellowface happened. And Yellowface happened as well on the tail crux end of which I decided to leave publishing, the publishing industry in New York City. And that, of course, is talking about publishing. It doesn't necessarily talk about my experiences with publishing because it doesn't necessarily talk about the industry side. It more talks about authors and talks about voices and representation. But still, it was kind of one of those oh, haha. I'm all of these moments in my life, right? And now we get to Katabasis. Which, to be fair, I was thinking about this. If I had read Katabasis right after Babel, and if I had read it when I was still toying with these ideas of academia and sort of the good and the bad at academia, I think this would have hit so much harder than it did. To me, it kind of just reinforces reasons why I didn't go into academia. So basically, it talks a lot about the unfair and the exploitation within academia. I have a lot of different friends who I was in similar boats with, and they did go into academia. And they talk a lot about the fact that, it's so poorly paid, the job security is not there, there's this exploitation, you don't get your name on credits. It reinforced kind of it went into why I wasn't going to go into it, but Katabasis really reinforces it, and it talks a lot about those themes. And on the other hand, it also talks about the idea of greatness and the idea of like intellectualism. I don't want to talk too much about this because I'm going to talk about it later, but I'm just saying that I recognized as I finished reading this how much more of an impact it would have been had I read it at a different time in my life. And there are books like this which are going to be this: right time, right book, wrong time, like right book, wrong time, right? So I did want to mention that as well, because as I was finishing reading it, I was like, oh, this feels like it's echoing parts of me, but it's not like hitting where I need it to be. And to be fair, it is a very rare gift to find the book that you need to read at that time and have it like fall into your lap. And I just am so happy and blessed, I guess, that the Poppy War and Babel both did that for me, but I don't think you can expect that of every book. So I just wanted to talk about that before I go into the book. And now we're going to talk about the meaty Katabasis. I want to talk first about tone and pacing. So one of the things I want to talk about is Yellowface versus Babel versus Katabasis. And I think that Yellowface to me had kind of like a thriller vibe to it. I read Yellowface at the same time as I read Disorientation and I'm Not Done With You Yet, and I will link that review video down below. It has all of those kinds of thriller mystery vibes. And I think to me, Babel has a lot of action going towards it. You know, at the heart of Babel, it's a story about awakening, a story about rebellion, and those are very high-packed, high action, ideas. And to me, Katabasis, I think in terms of pacing, felt very slow and then very fast. What I mean about that is that the tone, I feel like, of most of the book, or the beginning parts of the book, specifically maybe like the beginning third, is very much kind of like, this is Alice. This is the mental state Alice is in, and this is the way that she approaches academia and the world while she's going into hell. Also, the first couple layers of hell are not where, you were getting into the actual, how do I describe it? Like the actual stride, I guess, of the book, if you want to do like a running metaphor. So I think that for me, in terms of pacing, it definitely, to me, felt very slow at the beginning until then later. I would say the last third of the book felt very fast in comparison. So I do want to mention that as well, because a lot of people have talked to me, a lot of people who I know really love Our Kuang, have talked about the pacing specifically, and I do think that's part of it, because I think it goes through having to really have this foundation. I also want to say that Katabasis is very intellectual. I think that's partly why the pacing feels a little bit slower at the beginning, because it felt like doing homework in the best way. There are a lot of things and philosophy concepts that you really have to think about, paradoxes, logic things. R. Kuang has talked a little bit about this in other interviews, but it just felt a little bit like going back to school in a way that made me happy, because it kind of brought me back to the inner academic. But I do think that that's kind of why the pacing also dragged a little bit at the beginning half. I really did enjoy this aspect a lot. I liked the logician paradox logic puzzles and like the mind games and mind puzzles involved in logic. But I do think that if you don't like that, and if you don't want to have that similar feeling of being kind of not only mentally and emotionally stimulated, for example, within just a book, but goes even further by making it feel almost like school-ish, then maybe you won't really enjoy that kind of aspect to it. I definitely see why people read that and were like, got into that vibe and then made required reading lists. I've said that I don't believe that you need to read those required reading lists to their completion, but I did want to talk a little bit more about the intellectualism, because there's a lot to unpack there. There are a lot of things that are going on that made me feel like I had to read a lot slower, I guess, which is another thing. This is not a book where you breeze through the first 2/3. It's a book where you're kind of like slowly letting it unfold. And because of the magic, because of the world building and the foundational kind of logic inherently within it, it does make it feel like it goes a little bit slower. And so I wanted to mention that. Why I want to talk about it specifically is that I had seen remarks about both Yellowface and Babel for different reasons, but Yellowface and Babel about how they have like really intense themes or really strong themes and they keep hitting you over the head with them. A lot of people that I had seen online have been like, oh, R. Kuang doesn't trust you to kind of take up the theme and go with it. And I do think that Katabasis has a similar vibe in the sense that there are very, very strong themes about the exploitation of the power dynamic between advisors and students and mentors and sort of, role models. And it keeps going through that in a variety of different ways. And so I think if you had that similar, or if you're in that camp and have that similar opinion about the other two, you will feel the same way about Katabasis. To me, these themes and the connection to Katabasis is more talking to Alice. Like, Alice is sort of kind of like in a really bad, toxically abusive relationship with both kind of like academia, greatness, and her mentor. So to me, it doesn't necessarily feel like you're seeing the same thing over and over again, because each time you have to hear the same things over and over again. I have some experience in some sorts of toxicity in relationships, and it just kind of like is that way. So I did want to mention that in terms of tone, and I did want to talk about the pacing as I've done so. And now we're going to talk about the dark academia in hell. So I think part of dark academia is not only the vibe, not only the aesthetic, but to me it's really about what comments does this have on academia as a whole. I think that the main thing that I've kind of talked a little bit about already is that it talks about dark academia in the sense that it explores the very real exploitation and manipulation of students and young minds in these worlds and in these settings and in these relationships. And so I think that to me is the more kind of like dark academia aspect of this. I'm talking about a lot of different aspects of Katabasis because I've heard people say, dark academia, a descent into the underworld. I've even heard people talk about the romance, right? So I'm talking about different aspects that you might have heard about this to kind of make sure that I'm hitting all of the bases. And I do want to talk about that because I do think that unlike Babel, I think which takes it a step further, Katabasis feels kind of like dark academia, as I mentioned, but on a more personal, character individual level, and not necessarily about the academia as a whole, except sort of tangentially about academia. And I would say that if you're thinking about Babel, this to me is dark-ish academia, but not like dark academia like Babel was. I guess if that makes any more sense. Because I feel like Babel has these larger ideas about kind of academia and elitism as a whole. And I think that Katabasis gets towards it, but it doesn't go as far as Babel. The next thing that I want to talk about is the romance. And I actually saw a really good video by a creator, and I will link that down below. But the creator was basically talking about tropification of books and the romance and Katabasis. I will not necessarily re-talk about that because I think you should definitely go watch the original video. It was super insightful to listen to as I was thinking about the romance. But as a whole, I think that the romance is the least strong element and my least favorite element about Katabasis. Not for the reasons why you might think, and not only for the reasons that I saw in the video, because I think they made a lot of sense, but for me, I really needed and wanted Peter, the love interest and the side character, to have a lot more depth as a side character. I really, really wanted him to come out more in the book, especially because you see these dynamics of rivalry and you see all of these different things. And I really, really wanted that to shine through more than it did. I do think that, I guess, this is supposed to be the most romantic of R. Kuang's books. I do think the romantic tension was maybe higher in like the Poppy War and Babel, for example. But I do think that this is very clearly trying to be like the most romantic of R. Kuang's books, and I just don't think it quite hits the mark yet. I'm an avid romance reader, and I just feel like this one needed like a little bit more in certain elements. As I said, I don't want to rehash what was in the video, but definitely go check that out if you want to talk about specific tropes and specific scenes in Katabasis. But aside from that, which I definitely agree with, I do think that it needed just a little bit more of kind of the side character in terms of, with this rival to lovers, with this thing, like, what does it bring out into you? And I do feel like as a side character, I really needed more from Peter. I really loved him. I thought he was really great, but I just wanted more from him. And I think it just would have made it a lot stronger, in my opinion, specifically the romance. Like, for me, this is very much like Alice's journey. This is very much Alice's story. And to me, Peter plays a role in it, but it's mostly Alice is trying to figure out her relationship with greatness and her relationship with this idea of it eclipsing everything in her life. And so the romance is certainly an aspect to her awakening. And maybe it's a spark, or maybe it's the kindling, like the last, change, the last flint, or however you want to call it with all these different metaphors. But to me, it's not as much as I've seen people going into it. Like, I've seen a lot of people being like, oh, this is going to be a romance. And I would say that's not the primary bit of Katabasis. It's like the fantasy, and it's also not necessarily, to me, the strongest element. I enjoyed some of the some of those moments and stuff, but I would say it's not the strongest element to me. So I just wanted to make sure to say that. And I know, let's just talk about what I keep referring to. What I think was the most resonating theme in Katabasis was this idea of greatness and this idea of like intellectualism being above everything, right? So I feel like we have this, this idea of the academic, the tortured artist, the tortured poet, right? This idea of a person who is suffering so much to make the best art they possibly can. This connection between suffering, intelligence, cleverness, greatness, right? The idea that suffering and greatness go hand in hand. And to me, that's the biggest and the strongest element of Katabasis. Really diving into the idea that do we really need to suffer to be the best that we can be? Do we need to suffer to create the best art, to have the best ideas, to be at the top of our field? And then, is that worth everything else in our life? Is that worth the relationships we have, the friendships, the family, the love? Like, does that need to eclipse everything? And they're so much intertwined, these kinds of ideas. And to me, Alice is really struggling with that. She's struggling with not only this idea of like, do I have to give everything I possibly can, turn myself upside down, get physically sick, feel like I'm dying? Do I have to do that to make the best thing I possibly can, to get to the top of my field? And at the same time, because of the toxic relationship and because of the awful power dynamic she has with her mentor, she also has to feel like, okay, if these are what greatness is, if these are who my role models are, if this is this idea of, like the cream of the crop, it has to be worth it. Like, I have to have a reason why I'm going through hell, right? This is the connections, right? These connections between hell. I have to have a reason why I'm going through hell to get to this thing. Because otherwise, what is worth it? Like, what is worth it to do this if it's not greatness and if it's not to be this person? I liked this line, and one of the things that I thought about is it's we talked a lot about envy, and we talk a little bit about in Yellowface, but it's like embodiment. And if you liked that theme in Yellowface, not only obsession, not only love, not only all of these things, but this like desire to be someone, not just be in their shoes, like to be them, then that's a theme I think that goes further in Katabasis than it does in Yellowface. Well, I would say that it goes in different ways. It doesn't necessarily go further in some ways. I don't want to give, like, this is not for spoilers. But I think that they both tackle this. And to me, Katabasis feels very much kind of like Babel and Yellowface, these ideas all swirling around each other. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of themes, greatness, and also my favorite element of Katabasis. And also seeing Alice, go through this as someone who's, in my opinion, and people around me, like, extremely driven to the point of self-destruction, like me. This resonated with me. And so while it wasn't necessarily like this light bulb aha moment, because I've been struggling with this for a while, you will have seen this on the channel, it definitely to me was the strongest element that like got at my own insecurities. And I also think the crux of the book, the main theme of the book, and the way that everything kind of comes together. So now we're going into our post-Katabasis. And I thought I would just share the idea of like a tier list and special editions. So first of all, in tier list, I have, basically this is my last slide as well. In tier list, I have, so the Poppy War I feel like should be number one because of my intense nostalgic love for this one. But in terms of not looking at kind of like otherwise, I think it would be Babel, the Poppy War, Katabasis, and Yellowface in terms of my tier list. Special editions, I need the Illumicrate one. Like, I love red, as you can tell. And so I need it, right? I saw a bunch of different ones. I also really love the OG, like, US Deluxe one. The green one, I think it's really nice. I love the way that it's very different from, for example, the UK one. I'm also going to get like a UK one with the fun staircase edges. So, you know, I will have probably 3. And I like that idea. I like that idea of it being like black and white, green and red, and almost having kind of this trinity of colors. 3 is a magical number. And so that's my goal. Fingers crossed for me for the Illumicrate one. I really did enjoy Katabasis. I know that it's felt a little bit weird to make this video the way that I did, mostly because I think we have an interesting conversation or conversations for a future video that needs to be discussed in more length about criticism and not favoritism, because that's not what I mean, but critiquing our favorites and the place of intellectual criticism about things that we really love, media things that we can recognize that are really near and dear to our heart or resonate really well, but also that they have little flaws in them, that they are things that we don't like about them. So as someone who kind of categorically hands down adored the Poppy War and Babel, to me it's felt a little bit weird to make this video because I didn't hands down love every single aspect in Katabasis. As I mentioned, the romance really let me down. And so it's been a different feeling to kind of sit with. It's really easy. I know that as a book reviewer, I know that it's really easy to kind of give reviews of things you didn't like. There are a lot of things that you know you didn't like. And in some ways, it's hard to give reviews of things you really loved and really liked because it's like, everything's amazing. I love everything. And then for me, actually, I find that it's the easiest to write reviews of things that are like 3 stars, kind of mid things. It's easy to pick apart the things I like, things I don't like. And so for this, with it being kind of in this nebulous 4-ish, like star-ish rating, I'm having a little bit harder time pinpointing it. So that kind of is this long rambling tangent about the way that this book has kind of made me rethink about the way that I write reviews, the way that I give reviews that are helpful for everybody else. That's kind of how I felt about Katabasis. I hope that this was useful and interesting for people to watch. I know that a lot of people have been wondering what I think about Katabasis and wondering how I felt about it, and I wanted to talk about that today. I am so grateful that I have this. I really enjoyed this one. But I wanted to make a review to kind of show everyone how I thought or show people what I thought. And I didn't treat this lightly. I made this PowerPoint and I wanted to talk really in depth and explore all of the different things that I liked and the different things that I wished that there had been maybe more of as a whole for Katabasis. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Let me know down below any of the parts you liked about this video, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your reading day, week, month, and year. I'll see you next.